Hello and welcome to this little discussion. Thank you for being one of the 4 or 5 people that's actually going to listen to this. Well, let's talk about libertarianism. Adam Kokesh is now running for president, and he has a book out online called Freedom. Just called that Freedom. It's available for free. Download. You can get the e-copy for free, download it straight to any of your devices, which I have right here. And I don't dislike libertarians. I'm going to say that flat out. Absolutely. I like a lot of the things libertarians say. They're the ones talking about non-interventionist foreign policy. Yeah, bring it on. Absolutely. But there are some things that I would like to just kind of put out. Almost sort of like playing devil's advocate, but also some things that I genuinely don't quite understand about libertarianism. So if you are a libertarian by chance listening to this, and you have any sort of comment at all, and anyone else can jump in, feel free to correct me, set me straight, tell me what libertarians think about some of this stuff. First one, taxation is theft. And yeah, I mean, almost in the first pages of Adam Kokesh's book, yeah, they have this whole thing, taxation is theft. Well, from the constitutional side, in America, we have Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 of our Constitution that says Congress has the right to pass taxes. So that's the first thing that I would say about taxation being theft. Not being theft, that is. And the second thing is, we don't have to live in America. And if you choose to live in America, you accept the laws by default. And how does this actually work? Because when I was younger, I couldn't understand how people like George Washington and James Madison and Thomas Jefferson were able to make laws that other people had to follow. Like, what right did they have to create documents that were going to decide how I'm going to live or how you were going to live? But in reality, over time, I was just like, well, if I don't agree with those laws, I should move to a different country. And then if you move to another country, you are knowingly moving to a place that has laws, and you are accepting that you're going to live in a country that has laws. You made that choice. You chose to go there. You have to follow the law that they have. Because you don't decide how another country like Canada or Denmark or Somalia or Sri Lanka gets to live. You can't just walk up and just say, hey, everybody, we're doing it my way. No one would really entertain that possibility. That's kind of just someone trying to exert their control onto the world. And that is an act of aggression, is it not? Which libertarians are all opposed to. So if you choose to stay in America, the opposite side of the coin, if you do like the opposite, well, then if you're choosing to stay here, then you're knowingly accepting the laws of the land. There was that website, Free Keene, and I guess it's a movement called Free Keene from Keene, New Hampshire, and they post some lots of libertarian videos, and they featured one that was a trial of Darrell W. Perry, who ran for president last time around. And he asked a police officer, when did I agree to follow the laws in the state of New Hampshire? And the officer says, when you drove through it. All of these things about laws are accepted by default, which includes taxation. Like if you're going to be working in America, you've accepted that you are going to be paying taxes. You accept it by default. Your very presence in the workforce is sort of an agreement that you are going to pay taxes. The only counter to that is you don't have to pay your taxes. You just have to risk the possibility of going to jail. More importantly, who says that you have to pay taxes? Who says that you have to work? Who says you have to own property? You could be a homeless person. If you really are opposed to the notion of having the government exerting force on you for peaceful behavior, as Kokesh writes in this book, well, why don't you just become homeless? Then you wouldn't have to pay taxes. You could just eat out of dumpsters if you wanted to. I mean, it's just like, and if you aren't being outwardly belligerent and aggressive and destructive, why would the government come after you? That's another big thing that I don't understand. It almost just sounds like a lot of these libertarian things are just saying, I would love to be a homeless man and just, not have any ties to anything, except for the fact that I also want to own property and I also want to live in a house. And it's not that they want to be homeless, they just want to be less, which we don't really have a word for that concept yet, but you can be less or something like that. Okay, the next thing going on here. The threat of government violence creates monopolies. this is something that has been discussed by a lot of people, where it's like, does the government have a monopoly on force? Well, here's a thing for the Libertarians. Steven Crowder, who claims to be a Libertarian, even though I've never heard a single Libertarian thing from him, is saying some things like, the government should be like the referee in a hockey game. Because he said he's Canadian or something. I think they play hockey up there, so I'm told. No, he's like saying that the government should be like the referee in a hockey game, where they're there to intervene, if there is a problem. But other than that, they should stay out. But that's a terrible analogy, because the government is not a referee. No, that might be the equivalent of a security officer or something like that, a security guard. The government is the league itself. And just to sort of say something like, to use that analogy for libertarianism, are you going to have 320 million games all at the same time with everybody following the rules that were just agreed upon by the people who are playing them? Is it physically possible to have sort of a hockey game with no referee? Yes. Is it possible to have 320 million hockey games going all day, every day, 24/7, and no one violates a single rule? I don't see how that this is possible, because a lot of the things that they talk about with the non-aggression principle and the removal of government, if you are to remove this thing, whether it is a monopoly of force or not, you're kind of saying that people are just going to be following the non-aggression principle, and it's going to be something that they're going to use to just make decisions, and they're going to be making things without the control of the federal government. But to do that, you would need every single person in your country to think in the exact same way at the same time. And under any circumstance, I don't see how that's possible. Look, I understand idealism. I'm an idealist. I love ideals. You want peace on earth? Yeah, sure, that's a good thing, right? It's good to strive toward your ideals. But to say something like that we're going to make every person in the world think the exact same thing at the exact same time, and everybody's just going to follow this principle of non-aggression, well, I don't quite, this goes almost beyond idealism to something that sounds rather implausible to me. But once again, if anyone has any comments to make, please throw a comment at some of this. Now, going back to that note, let's talk about decision-making. Because, it's not, a lot of things in Adam Kokesh's book are sort of talking about resolving disputes through what is called peaceful persuasion. And I'm only talking about his sections on government and statism right now in this book. But it's talking about peaceful persuasion. The things that I'm kind of want to say about that is, if we were to remove this government, the way he's talking about, well, this is all the stuff that Jordan Peterson talked about with dominance hierarchies. Like saying just that groups sort themselves out into dominance hierarchies. Not only groups, but also lobsters, remember? So it's like, if you have a group of people, whether it's 5 people, 10 people, 15 people, they're going to sort themselves out into a dominance hierarchy. Well, how exactly, or my real question should just be, why would anybody want that? Why would you want the dominance hierarchy to be the only form of control? Why would you want the dominance hierarchy to be a sort of guiding force for you? So it's like, because libertarians who want, anarcho-capitalism and libertarian secessionism, they often talk about communities. They're not just saying that every single person should just live by themselves on like a 1-acre plot of land and grow their own vegetables, and that's it. That's the end goal. No one is ever going to interact ever again. No, they actually talk about having communities. Well, if you have a community with no government, it's just going to follow the guidance of a dominance hierarchy. It's just going to use that as the sort of control point or the sort of filtering mechanisms by which ideas get passed around, what Adam Kokesh identifies as peaceful persuasion. But wouldn't you have less rights if that were the case? Wouldn't you have less freedom if that were the case? I mean, when you have laws, you have very established things that are yours. Whether it's the First Amendment or the Second Amendment or the, I was about to say the Ninth Amendment. No, we can't use that one. But even just things like the right to vote You have very clearly defined things that are yours. But if you don't have that, if you don't have any sort of documented rights, it's just going to go along with the dominance hierarchy. And it's just going to matter about how dominant someone is. What if someone is louder and more persuasive than you? What if someone is more well-spoken and better at arguing than you? Does that mean that your rights can go away? Does that mean that your rights would be brought down to nearly zero? I mean, like, well, you wouldn't actually have any rights at all. All you would have is your own body and the non-aggression principle. But the non-aggression principle doesn't remove dominance. It doesn't mean that someone else isn't going to be dominant in a community and just move everything to their advantage. And that goes all back to top-down governance. It's just taking away the labels. So the whole point is, you would have the same structure. You're going to have a dominance hierarchy where one person would be kind of the most influential member. One person would be the most dominant, and you might be the subordinate. You might be the bottom rung. So, like, wouldn't you have less rights in that example? And it's not even an example. This is just the entire theory of the libertarian stuff that Adam Kokesh is advocating for. That is the biggest thing that I would say that I really just do not quite understand about libertarians. Why would you want the dominance hierarchy to sort things out, as opposed to having written down, established legal rights for, well, every person, for every citizen in your community? Moreover, Adam Kokesh also writes, you own yourself. Okay, I can agree with that. However, you own yourself, and even the smallest sense of doubt in that statement is a self-expression. So no one can deny that they don't own themselves. And then, like, if you own yourself, then, like, no one can do anything to you. My biggest question to that is, how do you get to that conclusion? Like, who gets to decide that about, human body ownership? I mean, when I say I can agree with that, I mean, like, yeah, you have the ability to move your body the way you want, but how did you get to decide that this idea is this is how it is? I mean, you haven't argued your case. I mean, you haven't debated it in front of the existing structure. You haven't asked every single person in the country what they think about it. How do you get to decide all these things about what the human body is? Who gives him the right? Who gives Adam Kokesh or any of the other libertarians the right to decide what human ownership is or is not? I mean, like, that's what the Founding Fathers were all about. Inalienable rights is endowed by the Creator. All men are created equal, which should be all mankind is created equal, but they put it up there to the divine. They were just like, no human is deciding what you are or what you can do or what you should do. That's the stuff that I would really say that I can agree with, because you are born with rights from almost a higher power. But Adam Kokesh seems to be eliminating all that and just sort of saying that humans get to be the deciding factor in what the human body is and what the human body is not, and how much you own yourself and you do not. I mean, you can move your body any way you want. You can put your hands up and put your hands down. You own yourself in that respect. But just to say that no one can say anything to the contrary, well, how did you get to that conclusion? And that's another question thrown out there. And the last thing is, if you create something of natural value with your own labor, you bear a right to control it. This is something that I just saw as a red flag. I mean, like, are you telling me that if you have a river where you're living, next to where you're living, and you cut down all the trees and you just dam up the river, so you're saying, I get all the water, nobody gets any water. I created something of natural value with my labor, and I have the right to control it. Do I control the whole river and nobody gets any water? I mean, what on earth is this? No, absolutely not, because, well, the way we live in our current world is, if you make decisions like this, you are connected to other things, and you're also accepting the law by default. You are responsive. You have to respond to the state, the local laws, the federal laws. They have these in place so people don't do something like that. They have these in place because you are accepting that you are a member of this region, this geographic area, by default, and you have to follow the according laws, which you agreed to by your very presence. So how could you ever say that you have the right to break away from this if you have already agreed to it by default? Wouldn't that be an act of aggression? in itself,